Good afternoon. Thank you for coming. Especially taking into account there's a storm in Madrid. Everything seems to stop in the situation. Fortunately, I am very glad to see that you all made it. Pablo Gonzalo, I am responsible for the section of culture and the Fundación Telefónica space. I just wanted to address a few words to say that for us it is great to be able to participate at this first edition of the Festival of Ideas held in Madrid. We were told about it by the director of the Círculo de Bellas Artes in Madrid, one of the organizers, together with the Fábrica. It is a great initiative. It is very much needed, and hopefully it will be maintained in Madrid for many years. I would like to take the opportunity to say congratulations to the Círculo, to La Fábrica, and also other institutions that are supporting this festival on ideas, philosophy, that is focused on catharsis. This is very attractive. As I was saying, we are going to participate by organizing activities at the Speaker's Corner, very near our headquarters, and also by holding several events at Espacio Fundación. This is the first one of these events. I'm not going to talk for too long. We have with us today Mona Simeon from the University of Glasgow. She is one of the most renowned experts, and she has very suggestive ideas with regard to knowledge and disinformation. At Fundación Telefónica, as I was telling her before, we've talked about this quite a lot. We've held an exhibition that we had on fake news. We have Mona, and we are fortunate enough, after her presentation, there will be a conversation with Lucía Gómez from Maldita.es, who also collaborated with us during the exhibition of fake news. And then the two of them will be talking, and then we will open a Q&A with the audience if there is enough time. Without further ado, I will give the floor to Mona Simeon, thanking her for coming to Madrid. So you have the floor.
It's on. Yeah, lovely to be here. Thanks a lot for having me. This is a wonderful event. I'm very jealous that you have it in Spain. We don't have it in Great Britain, but we hope to copy it and do it maybe at some point in the not too distant future. So what I've been working on recently is the relationship between these two very scary phenomenon that we see a lot these days, one having to do with the spread of disinformation, and the other one having to do with distrust in expertise and evidence resistance. And the reason why I'm worried about them is because I think that they generate a puzzle for the researcher who wants to explain what's going on, as well as for the policymaker that tries to solve the problem. So here is the puzzle. So one thing to observe is that we have very sophisticated ways for acquiring knowledge and transmitting it, right? We're getting more and more sophisticated. And nevertheless, we seem to experience this epistemic problem, so problems having to do with our rationality of beliefs and with acquiring knowledge. So this seems funny to begin with, right? In a world in which we are more connected than we've ever been, where, pretty much any piece of information is at our fingertips, that we now experience, as the World Health Organization put it, an infodemic. And the United Nations very recently claimed that the knowledge crisis that we experience should be declared an existential crisis for humanity. So, when you hear this quite worrisome predicaments, you start wondering what went wrong. Given that we have so much knowledge at our fingertips, how can it be that we are experiencing this ignorance crisis? So as I said, there are two key triggers that all theorists agree upon for the knowledge crisis. One is that we tend to trust too much, it would seem. We trust in a sources of disinformation. But on the other hand, it seems as though we trust too little, in that we distrust scientific expertise, which is quite a new phenomenon. People, used to trust scientists more so than, for instance, public institutions. So historically, trust in public institutions has varied depending on the political stage that we were at, but trust in scientists had tended to be quite stable. So this lack of distrust in scientific expertise is a very new and worrisome phenomenon. Now, why is this puzzling? Well, it is puzzling because the data seem to be pulling in opposite directions, in that the audience seems to be both too gullible and too skeptical, right? So we trust too much when we believe sources of disinformation, but we also trust too little when we don't believe scientists. So it's very hard to see how we should solve this, because, one way to solve the fact that we trust too much would be to train people in school to be a bit more skeptical. Or one way to solve the fact that we trust too little would be to train people in school to trust scientific expertise. But if these two phenomena occur together, we are faced by a puzzle. Should we teach people to be more trusting or less trusting? So here is a hypothesis that my colleagues in social psychology have made very famous, and that sneak peek, I'm gonna claim this hypothesis is false. But the reason why it's important that it's false is because policymakers have bought it. So this hypothesis has been very popular not only in social psychology but also in policy making. So there's a lot of policy that relies on this hypothesis that has been circulated in social psychology. The hypothesis is called the politically motivated reasoning hypothesis, where the thought is that what explains this weird combination of phenomena has to do with the fact that we don't base our beliefs on evidence anymore. So it's not like we trust this source because we take the evidence that comes from this source to be more trustworthy than it is, and we distrust the other one because we take it to be less trustworthy. We don't even care whether it's trustworthy or not. We don't form beliefs based on evidence. We form beliefs based on wishful thinking. Motivated reasoning is, just fancy talk for wishful thinking. So here is how it goes in more detail. The thought is that the source of persistent public conflict over policy-relevant facts is sourced in politically motivated reasoning. Well, the thought is that when we assess information, instead of assessing it with the goal of figuring out whether it's true or not, we assessing with the goal of figuring out whether it fits our political identity or not. So, if I'm a lefty and I watch TV and I see someone on TV saying, well, actually, it turns out that there are some areas in the US where having a more liberal policy on guns turned out to have some good results. Whether it is coming from a trustworthy source or not, it doesn't matter. According to this hypothesis, just because I'm someone who is inclined towards the political left, I'm not going to believe that data, no matter how reliable it might be. I'm going to reject it. Why is that? Because it doesn't sit well with my political identity. If that data were to be correct, everything I believe in, being a leftist person, doesn't hold anymore, right? Similarly, if you're someone who's inclined towards the right wing, you're going to reject all information, for instance, about the economic benefits of migration and so on, because that doesn't sit well with the kind of political creature that you are. You don't want to hear that immigrants are good for your country. So the thought is that the reason why this puzzle shows up is because we don't really care about the truth when it is about policy-relevant facts. We just care about what we like to believe, given our political identity. So, why is this interesting? Well, because for the longest time we thought, well, people who don't believe scientists, who don't go and take their vaccines and so on, these are special people who maybe are just not well educated enough to understand the validity of scientific claims. So maybe, the way to get rid of these puzzles is to beef up our education system, to train people in a way in which they are going to be less vulnerable to this kind of phenomena. But according to the PMR hypothesis, that's not going to work, because according to the defenders of this hypothesis, actually the more educated you are, the better you are at believing based on political identity instead of believing based on the evidence. Why is that? Well, because the more educated you are, you're better at arguing. If you're better at arguing, you're also better at arguing yourself into believing what you actually want to believe, even if the evidence suggests otherwise. So the hypothesis predicts that the more educated you are, the more rubbish you're going to be at evaluating your evidence and believe in accordance to it. So what is the proposal? This sounds really grim. If education is not going to cut it, what's going to cut it? The proposal is fostering intellectual virtues. So the point is that these people think, look, if you foster open-mindedness in schools, people are just going to be more inclined to consider other people's hypotheses, even if they don't like them, if they don't sit well with their political identity. So the only thing that we need to do is to foster open-mindedness, to foster this kind of flexibility in people. So now I'm going to tell you what this hypothesis that is quite scary. I hope you're quite worried by now. Why this hypothesis is false, so you shouldn't be worried. So this is the good news part of the talk. So here is something about this hypothesis. It implies very widely spread irrationality, right? So it implies that whether you are well educated or not, whether your background evidence is good or bad, it doesn't really matter. We are all extremely irrational when it comes to assessing policy relevant facts, at least when it comes to assessing that. Any theory that has this implication that there is such a thing as widespread irrationality in human populations has a very low degree of plausibility. Why? Because we are a highly successful species. We walk the streets successfully without bumping into things. We, build machineries and societies and all kinds of things. We are very successful. This success cannot come without cognitive success. Our success relies a lot on just the fact that we're very good at acquiring knowledge. If we were this irrational, so if we were irrational enough whenever we don't like something to reject the evidence, that would not sit well with the kind of progress that we've made, right? So basically what I'm saying is we need more evidence to believe a theory that has this absolutely widespread implication that seems to suggest that it's really weird that we are as successful as we are. So now let's dig into the evidence to see, is the evidence there? Well, it isn't. So if you look into the experimental setup, what is actually happening is people just look at correlations when they make this claim. So they look to see, is Mona a lefty? Yes, she is. Does she also at the same time reject anything you might tell her about guns being safe? Yes, she does. Well, it follows that she rejects these claims because she's a lefty. But causation is not correlation. So here's another thing that I have, and thereby is correlated with my beliefs about, with my rejecting evidence about gun safety if it were to come my way. I also have a lot of evidence against gun safety, right? So, I lived in Europe my entire life. Whenever I lived in Europe, turns out not having guns is a good thing. We don't have a lot of school shootings. And then, I watch TV and I see a lot of school shootings in the US. This all constitutes my background evidence that guns are not safe. So when someone comes and tells me, well, actually guns are quite good, I'm not rejecting that in virtue of my political identity. I'm rejecting it in virtue of my background evidence that they're not safe. Now, you might think, well, how do you know? Maybe you are rejecting it in virtue of your political identity. Might be, but what I'm saying is that the experiments that they ran do not distinguish between the two causes. Because I have the evidence and I also have the political identity as a leftist. So it's really hard to tell which of these two is triggering my resisting evidence for the safety of guns. Right? So that is just inconclusive data. Furthermore, these beliefs that I have, like for instance that guns are not great, are often justified. So they're based on evidence. It's not like these beliefs themselves are not based on my wishful thinking, right? Furthermore, remember that I said that this hypothesis implies that the better educated you are, the worse it's going to be for you, the better you're going to be at arguing yourself into the kind of beliefs that you want to have, given your political identity. So this is just a conceptually confused claim that lies at the bottom of this. So if you look at the experiment, what they're actually doing is they're looking to see whether when you are motivated to reason about something by your political identity, you are more likely to do it. And of course you are. In general, when you are motivated to do something, you're more likely to do it. That is not very surprising. If I'm motivated to go to work, I'm more likely to go. If I'm not, I'm more likely to stay at home. So that's not a weird thing. But there is a difference between motivated reasoning, which means my beliefs are based on my motivations instead of being based on evidence, and being motivated to reason. So it may well be that because I really like leftist claims, whenever I get evidence that suggests that my leftist beliefs might be false, I am motivated to start searching for more evidence, and in order to protect my political identity, but that's fine. There's no problem with me being motivated to go and search for more evidence. So remember, just to conclude how worthwhile this hypothesis that's very popular these days might be, to completely kill it, as it were, let's remember the recommendation that we should foster open-mindedness. Now, here's something that we've known in philosophy for a long time, maybe since Aristotle. Intellectual virtues are not good for their own sake. They're good for the kind of people that we are. We are limited creatures. If we were to be gods that have all the information in the world, being open-minded would be quite a useless tool, right? And what does this tell us? This tells us that these epistemic virtues, like for instance open-mindedness, are valuable only insofar as we live in an environment when they tend to reliably lead to some goods like knowledge or true beliefs, right? So for instance, if I go, I'm a philosopher, if I am interested in scientific facts about COVID vaccines and I go and talk to my colleagues in medicine, I'd better be open-minded, because it better be the case that I absorb all that information. But if the doctor comes in the philosophy department and I start uttering all kinds of things about the safety of vaccines, that doctor better not be open-minded, because he's going to end up with a lot of falsehoods from what I take to be safe about vaccines, right? So the point is that being open-minded is valuable only in friendly epistemic environments, in epistemic environments where people tell the truth and where people are informed, but it's not a valuable thing in itself. If you are in bad epistemic environments filled with misinformation, you'd better not be open-minded. So this is just a lot of words to say that we can explain all the data, and indeed I claim that I have in the book that you have on your slide, with the rational response hypothesis. We don't need to postulate that people are irrational in order to explain the data. We can do it with the rational response hypothesis. Here is why. So remember that we said that we have these increasingly sophisticated ways of acquiring and communicating knowledge. Well, that's an abnormal situation for the kind of creatures that we are. We have not evolved in an environment with that much information coming from all the sources that are anonymous to us, and that is all at our fingertips all the time. So our cognitive capacities evolved in an environment where the informants were our neighbors, people that we knew whether they were trustworthy, whether they weren't, not some anonymous creatures online. Information was scarce, it was hard to obtain, so we needed to do a lot of investigation to figure it out. It was completely impossible to start investigating 600 sources for the same piece of information. So it's a very changed epistemic environment, and our cognitive faculties have not evolved in this environment. It is highly unsurprising that we would fail on occasion, that things would go wrong because our faculties just don't respond well to the environment. So one thing that is not surprising is that we would be updating our beliefs on misleading evidence, because we don't know how to pick the good evidence from the bad evidence online. How are we going to do that? We don't know. We haven't evolved in that environment. We're not good at it. We don't know whom to trust in a big testifier pool, in a pool filled with people that tell us things and that are not our neighbors. We don't know when they lie and when they don't. We don't know them personally, right? Furthermore, all this amount of information that might look like a good thing, it also justifiably going to give us some sort of epistemic anxiety, because we don't know how much should we investigate until we make up our mind, because we could go on forever. Google is large, right? So all of these are just weird things that have happened to our evidential environment, and our cognitive faculties, unsurprisingly, are not coping well. Does that mean we're irrational? No, it does not. So here is something that we know about learning, or it's a classic theory of learning. Learning means updating your beliefs or degrees of confidence on incoming information, very roughly. And when is it justified? When is it done well? Where it is done on evidence, right? What are pieces of evidence? Very roughly, we can think of them as facts that increase the probability for the claim, right? So it is the fact that you tell me that it's raining outside is evidence for me that it's raining outside, because when you tell me, that increases my probability that it's raining outside, right? And then you also have the opposite, defeating evidence. So these are pieces of evidence that, instead of supporting a claim, they make it less plausible, right? So if you come and tell me now, so I think it's probably raining in Scotland as well. After all, it's Scotland. But if you come and tell me that you check the news and it's actually sunny, then you defeat my statistical evidence that it's raining, right? In that you make it less plausible. You make the likelihood that it's raining in Scotland lower. So why is it important to understand how evidence and defeating evidence works? Well, because in order to understand whether someone is rationally responding, we'd better know first what they're responding to. Right. What's important also to know is that this defeating evidence, they come in two flavors. So you can have defeating evidence to what has been said. So say that one of you tells me that it's raining outside and the other person tells me it's not. That is defeating evidence to the content of what has been said. Right? It's raining? No, it's not. But more importantly, for our purposes today, there is also such a thing as undercutting defeating evidence. So this is evidence against the reliability of the source. You tell me that it's raining, and you tell me, no, that person is a compulsive liar. Don't trust them about rain. They lie all the time. So why is that a different type of evidence? Because that type of evidence is very dangerous when it comes to my relationship to this source. So if you just tell me, no, it's not raining, I'm not going to believe them. That's fine, we can move on in life, but next time they tell me something, I might believe them. But if you tell me, don't ever trust them, they're not reliable, you killed that source for me. I can never rely on what they're saying in the future. So this kind of undercutting evidence against is a very dangerous type of evidence when it occurs in your environment and it affects a source of yours. So I guess the point is that you are going to be justified in your beliefs insofar as you update them in accordance with this pool of evidence that you have. Probability increasers, probability decreasers, right? So that's what it is to be justified. Sorry, I moved too quickly. What is it to be unjustified? Well, to be unjustified is to look at these probability increasers and probability decreasers and not update your beliefs in accordance to them. So, if everybody tells you that it's raining outside, but you come to believe that it's not, that's an unjustified belief, right? And when you come to believe that it's not based on wishful thinking, that's motivated reasoning. So, what is important to note is that it's important to figure out whether we as creatures are forming say that we're forming this, false beliefs about, some of us are climate change deniers and vaccine hesitants and Trump supporters and all kinds of horrible things. So the question is, people who form these beliefs, do they form them because they're irrational, or do they form them justifiably in light of the kind of evidence that's lying around them, in light of the probability increasers and decreasers that they have at their disposal? Because those are going to vary from one person to another. Right? And why is it important to figure this out? Well, because if they are rationally responding, then we don't need to do anything to them. We don't need to educate them. We don't need to make them more open-minded. We don't need to do any of that. We need to work on their environment to make it less filled with misleading evidence, right? Because evidence, even if it increases the probability, it might be misleading. It might still be false that it's raining outside, even though you say that it is, right? So what you want to do, if I have a room full of liars who keep telling me that it's raining outside even though it's false, it's rational for me to believe them. What you want to do if you want to change my false belief is get rid of all of this room filled with testifiers that lied to me, right? So you want to work on the environment if I'm doing everything right. If I'm not doing everything right, then you want to work on me. So if you want to have successful policy, what you need to figure out is, are people justifiably believing or not? So here's a case study that we ran with a colleague in sociology in Scotland, where the black community had a very low vaccine uptake in comparison to your average Scottish population. So your average Scottish population uptook the vaccine at 80%, and the black community was around 40%, so very low. So you wouldn't be surprised that far-right newspapers in Britain were going on and on about how all these immigrants they're not well educated and they're risking our lives but not getting vaccinated. So my sociologist colleague and I went into these communities and we ran a study on why they didn't uptake the vaccine. So we ran a lot of, we got a lot of qualitative data by running a lot of workshops with them and inquiring and having long conversations about what is it exactly that determined them not to. So here is how they responded. Overwhelmingly, the distrust in the safety of vaccines was motivated by, first of all, distrust in the national health system. Why did they distrust it? Well, because, as it turns out, the NHS has discriminated against the black community in Scotland for centuries. Indeed, these people, if anything, are rational not to trust the NHS. So why is that? Well, the way in which they've been treated is very different from the way in which I've been treated. I am rational to trust the NHS and get the vaccine. They are not, given the history of discrimination that the NHS has with them, right? So what is happening in these cases is basically these people get justified beliefs denying the safety of vaccines. So justified beliefs the vaccines are not safe. Why? Because a major source of information about vaccines, the NHS, is undercut for them. Remember how we discussed earlier the case of the rain? When someone comes and tells you, don't trust this person, they lie all the time. That's what's happening to the black community and the NHS. They cannot trust anything the NHS says after the history that they had with the NHS, the history of discrimination. So it's not only about vaccines, it's about pretty much anything. If the NHS says it, they won't believe it, and they're right not to believe it. Right? So another thing that happens, as soon as that occurs, they're also more vulnerable to disinformation. Because, it's easy for me. I know about a reliable source when it comes to safety of vaccines, is the NHS. I'm going to go and get my information from there and not trust any other source. So my life is easy. Their life is that much more complicated insofar as they can't take their information from the NHS because they rationally distrust it. They need to find their information somewhere else. They're going to go online and they're going to become more vulnerable to disinformation. So here is just to give you an example of successful environmental intervention. So what worked with these people? Shockingly, the fact that we ran the study convinced more of them to get vaccinated than the NHS flyers. Because while we were sitting and talking to them about the situation, we became trustworthy testifiers and they went and took the vaccine. So we became better than the NHS at communicating on the safety of vaccine. So this is just, evidence for my theory, basically. That's how you defeat a situation in which the main testifier is not trusted. You come in with other trustworthy voices. You come with trustworthy voices and that these people can rely on. So what do we need? If the theory is true, first of all, we need enhanced support from the education system. So there are going to be cases in which people can be trained better to respond to evidence around them. It's not that they're irrational in the way in which they respond. It is that if they had better training to respond to evidence, they would do better, they would be more successful. So what happens now in the classroom is we're merely teaching norms of structural rationality. So our kids are getting the so-called critical thinking course. The critical thinking course just teaches you how to do valid deductions. So how to go from premises that you know to conclusions via deduction. It's an important skill. The problem with this entire topic that we're discussing today is that you don't know your premises because you're still in the process of acquiring information from your environment. You're not at the moment when you need to draw some conclusions for it. You just are acquiring it. So what we need to teach our children is not merely how to draw valid inferences, but also how to investigate things, how to do proper inquiry, what evidence sources to trust and what evidence sources not to trust. So that's one thing we need to do. What else do we need to do? Clean up the environment. If our experiment with the black community in Scotland generalizes, so if we're right about that, which we do expect we're right, what we mostly need to do is to clean up the epistemic environment. People are reacting rationally. It's just that they have very polluted evidential environments. How should we clean up the environment? Well, what we need to do is to replace fact checkers, which is what we have now. We have these AIs that basically try to track whether a falsehood has been said online, with disinformation checkers. Why is that? Well, because disinformation doesn't only work via falsehoods. Indeed, that's the silly way to do it, because again, we are a highly cognitively successful species. We are not that stupid. If you tell me now that it's been sunny in Scotland for the last year, that I'm not going to believe it. So if you tell me blunt falsehoods, I'm not going to buy it. It is well known in manipulation studies that that's not how you run disinformation campaigns. The way you do it is you say something true that implies something false, so via exploiting pragmatic phenomena. So you don't come on TV at Fox News and say climate change is not happening. No, you come and say moderate things, such as there is disagreement in science about climate change. Now that claim is true. It's true, there are a couple of scientists somewhere in Texas, very likely, that disagree. So, and that's all is needed in order for the claim that there is disagreement to be true. But when you come and say it on TV, because if you're the audience, you're going to think, well, they wouldn't say it on TV unless there's a very serious amounts of disagreement, as it were. It's called the relevance implicature that's triggered. That it wouldn't be relevant to be put on the news if there were only two crazy people in Texas, right? So when someone comes on the news and says there's disagreement in science about climate change, it is rational for me to believe, oh my God, there's significant disagreement, so I should just throw my hands in the air and not believe anything about it until they settle this disagreement. And notice, nothing false has been said on TV. And I've been disinformed about a very important political matter, right? Another thing that I can do is induce epistemic anxiety in you. So I'm not saying anything false, but I can come and say things such as, well, but are you really, really sure that the vaccine is safe? After all, scientists sometimes are wrong. And what I'm doing now is I'm falsely implying that unless you are absolutely certain that it's safe, you shouldn't get it, which is false. That is not how it goes. You should get it insofar as is the best option, right? So it might be that it's not safe, but if I don't get it, I'm going to die from the virus. So, I can't, I need to choose one. And given how much evidence these people have that it's safe, this is probably the best option. We don't need absolute certainty before we go and take vaccines. But if I say these things on TV, I'm going to imply to you that you do. So these are very subtle ways of disinforming people that are out there. And if we want to clean up the epistemic environment, we can't just do it the simple way with fact checkers. The good news is, however, that the bad AI, the disinformation spreading AI, also comes with a good variety. We can't beat the disinformation spread by AIs ourselves, but we can beat it with a good AI that is able to track everything that the bad AI is doing. So all we need to do is investigate how to build more sophisticated disinformation trackers. So this is my view of how we should define disinformation for the purposes of this tracking as broadly as possible, as being just content that is ignorance generating. We can generate it by asserting a falsehood, but you can generate ignorance via all this subtle pragmatic phenomena that I just described. So that's the kind of thing that we need to be able to track if we want to clean up the misinformation environment. So notice that what this means, what the options are the following. First of all, disinformation is much more ubiquitous than we thought it was, which gives us pause when it comes to assessing the rationality of believing for a particular target population, because we don't know what kind of disinformation campaigns they've been targeted with, disinformations that might work on them and only them, because disinformation campaigns also take advantage of people's evidential background. So if you come and tell me that there's disagreement in science about climate change, I'm not going to believe it's widely spread. Indeed, I'm going to challenge your assertion and say, how many? 2 of them? But if you go into my grandma's village and you say there's disagreement in science about climate change, well, then you're going to have a good effect, won't you? So basically, what we need to do is ascertain that people have different evidential situations. It is not the case that just because we both live in Scotland, we have the exact same evidential environment. So people might be just rationally responding to the kind of evidential situation that they're faced with. And we need to train AI to track more sophisticated phenomena than falsehoods. Thanks a lot.
Hola. Mona.
Hello, Mona. I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Lucia Gomez. I am the coordinator at education at martita.es. I don't know if you've heard about us. We are a foundation devoted to fighting disinformation and building citizens' trust through different initiatives. And in my department, we focus on education. So thank you for inviting me to this talk. I was really excited when I was told about it, and I've also been able to see that your latest book is called Resistance to Evidence. In the last 2 years, in the classrooms at school, We provide many courses in schools and high schools, and we have had teachers come to us and saying that for the first time, youngsters say, I don't believe data. Data that have never been questioned or challenged before, and they just deny this. They just say, I don't believe in this. So this is when I read the title of your book, I thought, oh, somebody's going to give me the solution to this challenge that we are experiencing now. So I wanted to start by asking you what is happening right now, taking into account this direct confrontation towards evidence. This is something that has never happened before.
For the question, I'm just trying not to hear myself in my headphones. So this is a very interesting phenomenon that you're telling me about. That worries me a lot. I mean, the explanation is simple. Unfortunately, the solution is going to be less simple. Mm-hmm. So again, we're talking about teenagers that have a very different evidential background than mine. So I'm not on YouTube every day of the week, nor do I have a lot of, I don't follow a lot of influencers. I don't do that kind of stuff. I'm, old and busy. So when we judge these kids, we always have a tendency to believe that we're all roughly, inhabiting the same evidential environment. So how can it be that these kids don't trust the scientists if I trust the scientists, since they have the same evidence as me that the scientists are trustworthy? And I guess that's exactly what the talk has challenged. No, they don't have the same evidence as me because they are following all kinds of things online that I'm not. So in a way, my old age keeps me epistemically safe because I'm just not skilled enough to go online and see all of this data. Now, what I think is very, very important to note is that your case is significantly different from the case of the black community in Scotland, in that this is a case of too much trust rather than a case of too much distrust. Is it rational, though, their trust? I want to say we need to go and investigate. This is an answer. The answer to this question cannot be given from the armchair. This is a sociological question. Just like we went and we investigated what is happening with the black communities in Scotland, we need to go and talk to these kids and ask them, where do you get your news from? Why do you not believe this data? What is it? Who told you that you shouldn't believe it? So we need to investigate exactly what is going on. I can't establish from the armchair that everybody is rational in their reactions, but I guess what I'm saying is, given the plausible assumption that we are responding rationally to evidence, what we need to do is go and investigate what triggers this response in these kids. Because here's one explanation that I don't find plausible, that all of a sudden, this particular generation of teenagers has become abruptly irrational, and we all this but Goldis, who just did very well in our time. So it's clear that it's an evidential environment problem, but we need to, evidential environment problems, we need to dig with sociologists to see what's going on there, insofar as we already have the theory behind it.
Y por ejemplo.
And for example, when we are dealing with things that occur every day, for instance, if the premise in this case were to be that Earth is flat, this is something we can access evidence, and we have scientific evidence to be able to deny this. At the same time, we would be able to deduce that this person is following a rational thinking.
Again, it's going to depend on their evidential environment. So, thinking of a normal kid, I want to say no. This is the average kid that comes to mind is a kid that's, a teenager in Glasgow that has the internet, has access to TV and so on. And that kid's evidential environment seems to, it seems very hard to predict that it is rational for them to believe that the Earth is flat. Because, they go to school, they have all kinds of sources of information. But that doesn't mean that everybody who believes that the Earth is flat is irrational. If you're a kid who grows up in a small village in the middle of nowhere in the mountains, and your entire community is a flat earther, and these are people that are otherwise reliable testifiers, so they're people who, whenever they tell you something, it turns out to be true. They tell you that there's milk in the fridge, you go, you find milk in the fridge. So on everyday matters, they always get it right. Then you're rational to trust them. They get it wrong on this particular occasion, but that doesn't make them unreliable testifiers, because being a reliable testifier doesn't imply that you're an infallible testifier. We all get it wrong sometimes, but we are still worthy of trust when it comes to our testimony, because we get it right enough times, as it were. So if this kid lives in a village, in this community that I'm describing, where everybody tells them the earth is flat, to be honest, it kind of looks flat as well. So, they also have perceptual evidence that it's flat.
Racional.
Yeah. So
racional.
these are extreme cases. The kid that has all the access to all the informational goodies is one end of the spectrum, and the imaginary kid that I just described in the flat earther community is the other end of the spectrum. Most of us are not in either of these ends of the spectrum. They're somewhere in between. So that's why we always need to go in the community to investigate, where are you in between these two extremes? Are you closer to the rational response or closer to the irrational response? And then we know what intervention is needed.
Claro. Sí, habría que ir.
Yes, we should look at case by case, right? Another thing that drew my attention in your text and book, when you were talking about intentionality, this is something that occurs at Maldita. When we talk about disinformation, people tell us, can it not be forbidden? Can we not forbid lies? Can we not make this illegal? And in this case, we have to explain that when your grandmother is sending you a WhatsApp because she's concerned, because she's received a certain kind of information that there might be a terrorist alert, or don't buy this because there's a package that is contaminated at the supermarket, there's no intentionality behind this, right? So legislation is very complex, but at the same time, as you were mentioning, intentionality behind disinformation.
Yeah, so this is one of the biggest problems that we have right now when it comes to policy for tracking and defending us against disinformation. Policymakers, as well as many researchers in political science, work with the dictionary definition of disinformation. That is quite a funny phenomenon, because normally in research we don't work with dictionary definitions. We know that those are just rough approximations and they're always false. Mm-hmm. What we do is, first we do conceptual analysis, so we try to analyze the concept to get a maybe not a perfect definition, but one that's closer to the truth, that captures the phenomenon better. And that is the kind of thing that philosophers do when they prepare their conceptual frameworks. But in empirical science as well, there are many researchers who work on conceptual frameworks, not on empirical investigations. But you can't run the empirical investigation if you don't define the concepts that you're going to try to test for, right? But to my surprise, when it comes to this very high stakes domain, the study of disinformation, very many studies as well as policies are drawn with the dictionary definition in mind. The dictionary definition is fully false. There's nothing true about it. So the dictionary definition tells us that disinformation, it depends from one dictionary to another, of course, but very roughly that it's false content that is spread with the intention to mislead. None of that is the case. So let me give you just two examples. First of all, I just gave you examples where it's not false content, right? When I say there's disagreement in science about climate change, it's true, but I still disinform my audience if I say that on TV. Why? Because I can do it via pragmatic phenomena. I don't need to do it via what is actually, strictly speaking, said. Secondly, because I don't need to intend to spread this information in order to spread it. The paradigmatic case of disinformation is the case of conspiracy theories. Conspiracy theories, in the vast majority of cases, are not in falsehoods that are spread intentionally. These are people who are really believers in those falsehoods, and they really want to tell you in order to save you. So their intention is definitely not to mislead you, it is to inform you, if anything. And that is the paradigmatic case of disinformation. And also, think also about black box AIs. Black box AIs do not have intentions. They don't want to do anything to you. They don't even have designer functions in the sense in which the AI learns. That's why they're called black box. The AI learns on its own without the designer being able to predict what the AI is going to learn. So if an AI starts spreading this information, which we all know it does, it does it without any intention, it's a machine, but also without even an intention on behalf of the designer. So there's nowhere to track that intention. So define it in this way is just an obstacle towards, we can't do research properly if we use this concept because it's a problematic concept. So whatever results we obtain are going to be equally problematic because relying on a bad concept. But we also can't legislate properly for exactly the reasons that you mentioned.
Sí. Cada vez
Yes, it is more and more complex, taking into account disinformation and current disinformation, and it's getting more and more difficult to say that something is purely fake. What we are seeing is that there's a sort of wrapping of reality around these lies so that they seem true, and so that they become more plausible, believable, and easier to believe by people. There is more logic in all of this, and in epistemology, there's more belief in this justification. One of the examples that I use very often here in Spain, it is quite close to us, has to do with breaking clouds with silver iodine. It is something that is in a certain way true. You can release silver iodine into the cloud, and this is being tested so that there's no grail falling from the cloud. It has an element of truth, but it generates a narrative that is a lie. They're not controlling climate with this technology, but it is not as easy as saying true or false, because it is wrapped up in this pragmatic phenomena, and it is quite complex, and it mixes some elements of truth within disinformation.
Yes, so pragmatic phenomena have been studied. I think the best theory that we have right now, we have it from Grice, but it's a very, very good theory. So what's really sad for those of us who know about the Gricean theory of pragmatics is that all of this information methods could be stopped in the very beginning by the cognizers themselves. So if we only taught our kids a bit of Gricean pragmatics, they would be able to defend themselves against this kind of disinformation campaigns. And we've known, so manipulation studies have known for decades now that running a proper disinformation campaign is not done with falsehoods. And as I said, because we're just not that stupid. We need to be fooled into believing things that are outrageous. So Grice thought that the way this pragmatic phenomena work, very roughly, I'm not going to give you a crash course in Grice, is that when we talk to each other, we assume that we're cooperative, right? So if I ask you whether it's raining outside, I'm assuming that you're going to give me, a cooperative response, because why would you lie to me about rain, right? So unless I have some reason to believe that you're out to get me.
te mentiría porque me parece rarísimo que esté lloviendo.
I would lie to you because I think it is very strange to think that it would be raining. I wouldn't believe this.
So this assumption of cooperation triggers all kinds of implicatures when we say something. So let me give you just one example. Say that you're driving, and I'm a passerby, and you're in a new town. You don't know the town, and you're running out of gas, and you stop next to me and you ask me, is there any gas? I'm running out of gas. Is there any gas station nearby? And I say, yes, it's 3 blocks away. And then you drive there and you find it closed, and then you find out that I knew it was closed. I didn't tell you anything false. There was a gas station there. But why are you getting mad now, given that I said nothing false? Because I implied something false. I implied that it's worth going all the way there, that it's open, right? Because it makes no sense for me to send you 3 blocks away to a gas station that I know it's closed. And why did you believe that about me? Because I never said it's open. You believed it because you assumed I was a cooperative creature who was trying to help you get some gas, right? So this is the kind of mechanism that you find. The case that I described earlier is a relevance implicature. when you come and say something on the news, it is assumed by the audience that you're a cooperative creature who's trying to inform them about the most important facts of the day. So if you come and say there's disagreement in science about climate change, what's happening there is the audience assumes that you're cooperative, and you wouldn't say this unless it was newsworthy, since you're saying it on the news. So how is it newsworthy? Well, it's not newsworthy if there's just two people disagreeing, so there's got to be many. So that's how you end up believing that there's a lot of disagreement in science. But nobody ever said that on TV, right? So that's how pragmatic phenomena work. What is, in a way, the good and the bad news is? The good news is we can really solve it really easily by just teaching some of this theory to kids. The bad news is we're not teaching it. It is really problematic. But as I said, maybe our education system also needs to catch up with the kind of new information environment that we have and with the kind of skills that we need to develop to navigate it better.
Sí, y también me lleva a pensar si no...
Yes, and this makes me think that maybe we should be teaching sources of information to be able to decide what is a trustworthy source and what isn't. And because you tell me, go to the gas station, it is 1 kilometer away, but who are you? Why should I believe you? Maybe I should check a map, or maybe I should look at that study that talks about the different gas stations and making sure it is trustworthy. Right now it is an interesting moment. Let's label it as interesting. Last week during the presidential debate in the US, we saw how Trump used as a source a woman who just appeared on TV, right? And I don't know what you think about this. An official source would be more trustworthy, but maybe a citizen just appearing on TV and complaining can give you, in a certain way, more. You can feel closer to that person and believe that person more. It is surprising to hear this in a presidential debate in the US, but it was just like that. Somebody said, well, where did you take this from? And well, a woman said it on TV. I don't know what your opinion is on sources, and understanding that not all sources are the same. It is not the same to talk about just a random person or a scientific source or a trustworthy source or an expert.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So one thing that we need to keep in mind is that our evidence about facts and our evidence about the reliability of the sources are not always fully separate. So, if I believe that you're fully trustworthy source and you come and tell me that 2 + 2 = 5, I'm starting to decrease my my level of belief in your credibility. So in a way, whenever you as a source say something, I always implicitly check it against my background evidence, and if some alarm signal gets triggered, you said something really funny now, maybe I should stop believing everything that you're saying, then I'm decreasing my trust in you, right? So what is interesting to note is that if you want to take the case of Trump, so sometimes because of our political convictions, we end up, as I was saying earlier, searching for more evidence that we would like to get. So if I would like to get evidence that climate change is not happening because I'm a right-wing person and we like to confirm this, I'm going to prefer to watch Fox News. So that is a breach in my duties to inquire. I shouldn't inquire in that way. I should, look at more trustworthy sources. But I prefer to watch Fox News because that's where I get the information that I like to get, right? I'm not much better. I only read The Guardian. Should I also listen to Fox News? Maybe, if I want to have a fuller view of the world. Do I want to do that? Absolutely not. I'm just going to read The Guardian every morning. So if tomorrow The Guardian is taken over by some, evil manipulationists, if it hasn't been already, then I'm going to be very vulnerable to whatever The Guardian says. So what I'm trying to say is that if you're Trump and you're already someone who doesn't quite like immigrants very much, you're going to search information and disinformation that confirms your theory, and you're going to watch all kinds of people that say all kinds of crazy things about immigrants because that's the kind of thing that you like to listen to. And there comes a point at which this evidence, this kind of biased way of doing inquiry, where you only listen to sources that are going to tell you bad things about immigrants and never listen to the other sources, is going to lead you to have an epistemic environment that's super polluted only to misleading evidence, because that's where your inquiry has led you to be, kind of closed into this epistemic bubble with only people that tell you things that you want to hear, as it were. Again, that is not different on the left side. For all I know, that's my situation with The Guardian. So.
No, claro, estamos en cámaras de eco.
Yes, we are in these bubbles, in these echo chambers, but you're using a term in your book, evidence flow. If right now this disinformation, this input that we are receiving is highly polluted, I like an analogy that Mona uses in her book that explains this very well. I haven't read philosophy in some time, and it helped me understand this better, comparing epistemological functioning with the respiratory system functioning. We need clean air to be able to make it work, different to other kinds of system that can just work on orange juice. But if our respiratory system receives contaminated air, it stops working. And right now, considering that we are surrounded by this contaminated input and this disinformation, our epistemological functions are failing, and we are falling in this disinformation and lack of knowledge. How can we think about this evidence flow that would clean the air, that would allow us not to fall into this trap of disinformation and not to have a polluted epistemological system?
Yeah, thanks a lot for the question. So the thought is, it's easy to think about the rationality of our cognitive systems in the same way in which we think about whether our lungs are functioning well. That's kind of the thought behind the analogy. So, some failures, some respiratory failures are the fault of our lungs. The lungs are malfunctioning. So if I'm sitting here on this sofa in a room filled with oxygen that's readily available, nothing else is going wrong, but my lungs just don't take up the oxygen that's available, that is a malfunction of my lungs. Similarly, if I have all the proper evidence lying around, no misleading, no misinformation, nothing bad is happening in my evidential environment, but my cognitive capacities refuse to take up this reliable evidence from my environment, then they're malfunctioning. But if the opposite is the case, so if my lungs are doing everything they can, but we don't have any oxygen in this room, there's only carbon dioxide or something like that, then that's not going to work very well for my lungs. My lungs are going to take up carbon dioxide, and that's not going to be a good, a happy story. Similarly, if our cognitive capacities are doing everything that they are supposed to do, they are uptaking the available evidence. If the available evidence is misleading, we're going to end up with false beliefs without any malfunction in our cognitive capacities. So in that way, rationality is a bit like proper functioning of the lungs. Now, if that is the case, it is easy to see how we can solve it. So evidence flow would be like oxygen flow. So if we don't have oxygen in an environment and that causes us to suffocate, we just need to reestablish oxygen flow. Similarly, if we don't have enough good evidence in an environment, we have too much misleading evidence, we just need to establish good evidence flow. So if the hypothesis that I'm defending is true, what is predictably going to happen is that if you invade an environment with enough good evidence from trustworthy sources, then all the bad evidence is going to get defeated. Because if 20 people tell me that it's raining outside, even though I can't believe it because, I'm in Spain, I'm going to at some point start believing it if I'm rational. So if my hypothesis is true, it predicts that all we need to do is to invade the environments of these people who are evidence resistant with more evidence and from trustworthy sources. Because invading their environments with more evidence from sources that they don't trust is not going to work. So if the NHS is just going to send more flyers to the black community in Scotland, that's not going to change their views on the safety of vaccines. But if the NHS is going to engage some sources that they trust, some members of the community, to go and tell them that vaccines are safe, that's going to work. So basically, it's a simple system. It is not a complicated way, not a complicated system that we need to put in place. The only problem is that, as we said earlier, we need to go case by case, because the trouble with these evidential environments is that we all have different ones. So probably can't go from one person to another, but communities are going to have very much in common in terms of evidential background. So what if we want to inform a community, we need to first check what their evidential background is, and where is it that our communication breaks down. Look, I'm not saying anything extraordinary. In journalism, we've always known that you need to tailor your message to your audience, right? So that's roughly what I'm saying here. Just sending the same flyer to me and the member of the black community is not going to have the same epistemic effect.
Claro. Y bueno, sí se sigue haciendo, ¿no? Targeting tu público.
Yes, targeting your audience. You repeat this a lot. Another thing that you mention is that the most serious disinformation is aimed at those people that are the most vulnerable in epistemical terms. Who are these people that are so vulnerable? Because here we're talking about paranoid people, and we consider to be different from them, but it would be good to understand what you understand by epistemically vulnerable people, and also different spheres of investigation, research, education. What can we do for these people that are so vulnerable?
Yeah, thanks a lot. So I just want to say we are all equally vulnerable. It's just that we're vulnerable in different ways. So I have my evidential environment and you have yours. And depending on what my background evidence is, if you would be able to read what my background evidence is, you would be in an extraordinary position to spread this information at me, because you would know what claims I'm likely to accept and what claims I'm not likely to accept, right? So again, if you're someone who wants to convince people that climate change is not happening, telling me that there's disagreement in science about climate change, not going to do much. Telling my grandma, well, that's going to work much better. How do we know this? Well, because we know roughly what my evidential background is, and we know what my grandma's evidential background is, and that difference in evidential background is just going to straightforwardly predict that she's going to buy it and I won't. That is not to say that she's more vulnerable than I am. No, there's going to be a lot of stuff that I will buy and she won't. For instance, everything The Guardian says, you know. So, but the problem is basically, look, I guess the good news is it's solvable. The bad news is it's hard. People who run this information campaign take advantage of knowledge that they have about the evidential backgrounds of their audience. They don't come to disinform me with this kind of claims. They go to my grandma. They do it targeted. If they do it targeted, unfortunately, we can't do a blanket approach. We also need to take a targeted approach. We need to identify what the evidential background of a particular audience is and what that background makes that audience vulnerable to in terms of disinformation. That sounds awfully sad and complicated, but actually, again, I'm an AI optimist. I think that AI can solve this problem for us, in that AI's, YouTube recommender systems and other recommender systems online, what they basically do is they track our preferences, right? So they know the kind of stuff that we like and they give us more of it, right? Mm-hmm. Well, if we have an AI that's able to track our preferences, we surely can build one that's able to track our beliefs, because there's not much difference there in terms of tracking. Yeah. If we are able to track a rough belief system that a type of audience might have or a community group might have, then we can, again, roughly, it's not going to be precise because the evidential backgrounds, differ from one person to another. But it is predictable that, you and I are going to have more commonality than you and my grandma. So, we are going to be targeted with a different type of campaign than my grandma is going to be targeted with. So insofar as they do it targeted, we also need to do it targeted. If we need to do it targeted, we need to do it automated, because we don't have the capacity to do it automated. Compatibly with that is not to say that we can't do anything by helping individuals overcome their vulnerabilities epistemically. And as I said, I think that just putting more support in schools when it comes to how you should inquire well, how you should pick your sources, how you should search for evidence, and even, this kind of very basic stuff about how people can trick you by just using the pragmatics of language. This is basic stuff that is not complicated. Kids could learn it in the 5th grade. It's really not that extraordinary. So putting some of this in place is just necessary. We don't have it. We teach people geography, but we don't teach them how to defend themselves against disinformation. Now, geography is all good and well, but I want to say that lack of knowledge affects all of our walks of life, right? Why we don't have it so far? Well, there's a good explanation. We had an easy epistemic environment, and basically until the internet showed up, our epistemic environment was so easy to navigate that we didn't need any training. Now we need training. So, let's get it.
Ay, me pone muy feliz que digas esto porque claro, una está todo el día en el...
This is great to hear from you, because we go to schools and we say, be careful, check the sources. So this gives me hope. We're doing the right thing, we're on the right path, and we're focusing our efforts on the right things. How are we doing with time? Shall we open the Q&A with the audience? I think we need a mic.
Okay, thanks a lot for the very nice presentation. I also teach at the university, and I have seen in the last, 15 years, a change in the way students access information, which is one of the main problems here. And I would like to suggest that we have to fight the culture of the shortcut, okay? Because this is unbelievable. 12, 13, 14 years ago, students will go to books when you set any, homework or whatever, and now the references are just Wikipedia, and they are becoming more and more shameless. Okay, and this is I think we have to target that. I think we have to go into the idea that seeking the truth is very important, which I think they know, but one of the problems is that they don't know how ignorant they are. I mean, in some of your slides you were writing ignorance in some of your, but the definition of ignorance is changing. So they think they know, and they don't have any depth in their knowledge. And I believe this is what we have to address as educators. But thanks for all your work.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the question. I completely agree. You know what is going on, what is very interesting? Their reaction is actually natural. It is predicted by the way in which we evolved to react. So because we used to live in this very safe epistemic environment where we got all of our information from the doctor and from our neighbor, we used to be very trusting. So our default kind of reaction to someone telling us something would be to trust it. And that is fine in a safe environment, right? And we would only become untrusting if we had some reason to distrust the person. But the default thing, we would go in trusting, right? So unless something happened to signal to us that something fishy is going on, we would go in trusting. That's what they do as well. But they do it in this environment, right? We grew up in a simpler environment, and as soon as the internet came in, for us, all the alarm bells went off. Oh my God, how am I going to know that this anonymous person is telling me the truth or not? But they grew up in this environment, and they react just like we used to react when we were little. They just trust what they're being told. Of course, they shouldn't, because their environment is not as easy as ours used to be, and we need to teach them that they shouldn't. But it's interesting that actually they're just having the same reaction that we had, the reaction that we evolved to have in an easy epistemic environment. Yeah.
Yo voy a partir de todas formas aquí una lanza por la gente joven, porque en realidad también esto no es una cosa que esté afectando solo a las personas jóvenes. Estamos viendo, yo he trabajado también mucho con gente mayor de todas las edades, y el hecho de que a ti te llegue un mensaje por tu grupo de la familia de WhatsApp con un enlace a una web que no conoces y te lo creas automáticamente, está pasando también a gente muy mayor y que no contrasten y que no, o sea, no creo que no es una cosa como que se limite ahora mismo, o no es una problemática de las personas jóvenes que se creen la Wikipedia. Creo que ahora mismo a todo el mundo nos han dado un teléfono, nos lo han puesto en la mano y no nos han enseñado.
We just get a phone and we haven't really been taught to survive in this jungle.
Tiene que ser en inglés o en español. Bueno, que siento que...
Well, I think that we have talked about the physical environment. We've talked about AI and how it can tackle this problem from a digital point of view. But what about algorithms in this issue? Because we have certain private companies that have their own algorithms that are being trained and that are related to the universe of information of people. How can we deal with these algorithms? For instance, recently with Twitter or X with Elon Musk, how certain things were recommended from one person to another, and this fed into the vision of the world that they had, and they just went out into the street. And this is something that we should reflect on, how algorithms are contaminating information. This can be quite complex because we're talking about private companies that are controlling algorithms. At the same time, these algorithms are providing information, so it can be pretty complex. What can you tell us about this?
Yeah, thanks a lot. So that's what I was saying. We are in an age in which spreading disinformation via AI is very hard to control just by us getting better at tracking misleading stuff, right? So just look, the education systems should train us to do better, absolutely. But it is also, there comes a point at which we just can't deal with the level of deception that AIs are able to generate. So that's why I was saying that if we want to fight the bad AI, we need to do it with the good AI, because we're just not fast enough. We just need the AI to do it, right? And the good news is that if the bad AI can do it, the good AI can counteract it, because it's the same level of intelligence that's needed for doing it and for counteracting it. It's not that extraordinary. But that being said, there comes, I'm not a big fan of the politically motivated reasoning hypothesis as a hypothesis about what we all do every day in our lives. But that is not to say that nobody engages in politically motivated reasoning. And I want to say those people in Britain that came into the streets and destroyed all kind of places and had all these far-right gatherings, those are not people who were convinced to do that by the misleading evidence that was posted on Twitter. Those are people who were far-right violent people, and this was just an opportunity that was given to them to have a good reason to go in the streets. So there is, politically motivated reasoning exists. Football motivated reasoning exists. We think our team is better than the other. Do you think that's always true? No. So it's not like we don't do politically motivated reasoning. What is problematic is to think that we do it all the time, because that just leaves it very mysterious how is it that we even got here to this venue without bumping into things. I hope that answers your question.
Talk it was interesting. Some time ago in this same auditorium, Marta Peirano was asked if technology, if artificial intelligence, if we should be worried about the future of humanity, and she said, technology is not the problem, capitalism is the problem. And in this world that is controlled by some few companies, when we talk about oil or pharma or technologies, and we know that in some way they control even science and data, and we're talking about knowledge and disinformation, should we be worried? Is capitalism the problem? And if so, do we have to keep some optimism?
Well, I'm not a political scientist nor a political philosopher, so we can have a chat over a beer about what I think about capitalism, but I'm not going to talk about it here because it's not my specialism and I'm not comfortable speaking outside of my specialism. But what I can tell you is that you've been taking many aspirins all your entire life from those scientists that are funded by private companies, and it seems to have worked quite well for you. So, when we start, this has always been fascinating to me in the disinformation campaign about viruses. If the claim is we have reason to believe about vaccines, if the claim is we have reason to believe vaccines are not safe because I heard that there's something fishy with the sort of science or whatever, okay, with the research behind them, okay, that's fine. But if the claim is these researchers are always funded by this big pharma company, so we should not trust anything that they tell us, we should not get the vaccine, I think that claim doesn't really work unless you've never taken an aspirin in your entire life. If you've taken one aspirin, you should get the vaccine as well. Otherwise, you're incoherent. Either one or the other,
Sí, yo...
Yes, to this, I think that I can add that everything is starting and we're running after these aspects. Until last year, the European legislation was legislating on the commercial digital space. But if you look at the platforms that are part of this legislation, I don't even recognize them, many of them. I don't know them. So that in 2023, with the Digital Services Law or Act being activated, it is quite pioneer, and we will have to see how all of this is managed and how we establish relationships with these platforms and how we can measure our freedom, our usage, etc.
Hola, buenas tardes.
Yes, hello, good afternoon. First of all, I would like to thank you for this presentation and conversation. I'm really passionate about disinformation. I work in the public sector and I work on this topic specifically. And regarding Lucia's comment, there has been significant progress in legislation. Digital Services Act, for instance, one of the topics addressed has to do with disinformation, especially among large platforms. Not long ago, we heard about the European law on the freedom of media to be able to create more free, more plural media, with media that are more believable. But my question is aimed at media numeracy, literacy. What can we do from public institutions to be able to improve education for young people and not so young people, to improve this context, this complex context, to be able to detect when something is true or not, and any good practices that belong to public policy in a specific country, that could be used as a reference. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, I just shouted in my ear again whenever I do that. Yeah, so here's what needs to be done. You know how in research we are highly specialized? That's good because we are very good at what we're doing, but it's always bad when it turns out that there's a challenge that requires people from different highly specialized fields to work together, because it's just not easy. We have different methodologies. So what is required for, making progress on digital literacy is for a bunch of epistemologists, so philosophers that deal with rational belief and knowledge, to talk with educationists in order to revise the way in which we teach people, because we just, as I said, we did have our ways of trying to train people to do well epistemically, as it were. These critical thinking classes that all the kids get in one way or another were supposed to be that, right? We were teaching kids to not just believe everything that they hear, to think critically about it, to try to, have proper deductions and so on. And that was all good and well in a simple epistemic world, but that world is gone. So what we need is educationists to work with epistemologists to look into how, because I don't know how to design educational practices. That is not something I'm a specialist in. But neither does the education theorist know how to do it such that it actually achieves its goals of making us better at detecting misinformation and less trusting of all kinds of bad sources, but also more open to the sources that we should be open to. So they don't know that. I don't know how to design education practices, so we just need to work together. I guess, it's late. We should have started earlier. We need a lot of research funding to work together. Funding for interdisciplinary research is not easy to find, to be honest. It's much easier to just propose a project straight down your research specialism and get it funded. So those are a few things that are slowing us down. And we also, another thing that's slowing us down is we need to work with policymakers, because at the end of the day, we need to find out what exactly the problem is before we try to solve it, right? So ideally you want to have some sort of an interdisciplinary project that also involves some sort of co-creation workshops with policymakers where we inform each other about what we're working on. All of this needs to be done really quickly, because this is a problem that's not going anywhere and it's getting more and more high stakes, as it were. But unfortunately, that's not how research works. Research is not done really quickly, very rarely. I think the COVID vaccine is maybe the only counterexample. It takes years to apply for funding for a research project and so on and so forth. So I have colleagues who already have put in some project proposals on this, but it's going to take forever until the projects get approved, and until the results go to the policymaker is also going to take forever. So these are, in a way, we're not moving fast enough because it is easier to see that finding a vaccine for a virus is urgent. It's maybe less easy to see that putting in place some education policies is urgent, and I think that's a problem.
Sí, yo desde mi perspectiva.
Yes, from my point of view, working on media education projects here in Spain, I think that right now it is necessary to include this in curriculums. In the past, English was recognized as important, and English became part of studies, and we have many teachers who've had to train, better or worse, as for digital tools, right? Teachers have had to learn certain digital tools because it was considered to be important. But I think that at the same time right now, we all have mobile phones. We are all communicating and receiving information in different ways, and everything goes very quickly, changes very quickly. And right now we don't have the possibility of stopping this process. We will have to carry out this research. We will have to find algorithms that would stop disinformants. But previous to this, we have to try to prepare people, educate people with critical thinking and having the ability to adapt to what will come when it comes to facing disinformation, regardless of the format or the source. They should be able to identify it and seek other alternatives, challenge this information with these tools. And I think that the sooner the better. Primary school. I know that in certain European countries there are media education programs that are integrated within the curriculums of schools. I think this is a pending matter in Spain. It hasn't been incorporated in studies for teachers, of course, and for students, for both groups. And I can just recommend resources, materials that we have created at Maldita that hopefully would be useful, right?
Vale,
Buenas.
me dicen... Ay, perdón.
Yes, apologies. One last question. Okay. Thank you, first of all. Thank you for your time and for sharing your ideas. It has been very interesting to me. I don't have a question. It is a demand. I'm a teacher at a high school and I'm really fed up with the fact that any problem in society is related to a solution. And at high schools, we have to teach education for health, for sex, for maths, and with the long list of topics. At high schools or schools, we're not isolated islands. We need to have the whole tribe, as Masai say, to educate a child. And I think the amount of children that arrive is not that they're badly educated. They just have no education in many cases. And to work with anything is impossible. I will get my retirement in 1 year and 1 quarter. And I really can't wait for that moment. But we need everybody's implication, everybody's involvement. But taking into account the amount of students that I have from a difficult perspective, difficult to address and to talk to them. A lot of us are doing things in the wrong way. So thank you for listening. For me, this was important.
Sí, perdón que estábamos hablando.
Yes, we were talking about schools, it is true, but it is an effort to be made by society in its whole. We're talking about schools, we're talking about families, and considering that the question came from a high school, but yes, we try to have a holistic approach to these matters. We have to involve all stakeholders and have a cross-cutting and holistic approach. All these tools to be able to face disinformation have to come. I think that parents are also quite desperate with regard to this topic, as for teachers. So we receive information from all these sources. Yeah.
Just one more thing to say. I completely agree with you that we can't, as per usual, just blame the education system. As I was saying at the beginning of the talk, that the assumption with all of these vaccine hesitant people had just been they're not educated enough. Immediately, that was the reaction of the far-right media in Britain. It was shocking to me. I completely agree. The problem, however, is that when it comes to epistemic problems, when it comes to problems of knowledge, it turns out that all of our efforts in education, I'm someone who works in education as well, I'm a professor, all of our efforts in education are undermined about all topics if people resist scientific evidence. So in a way, teaching people about this information and what sources they should trust and what sources they shouldn't is more important than teaching them about geography, physics and mathematics, just because they're not going to believe anything that we tell them about geography and physics and mathematics if they go online and some influencer tells them that they shouldn't trust scientific evidence. So in a way, the problem of disinformation and evidence resistance faces our education system in its entirety with a big challenge, in that all of our claims we're going to struggle to get these kids to believe our claims, and that's going to make our life worse, not easier.
Bueno, pues creo que damos...
Well, I think that we consider this conversation closed. Thank you for coming, considering it was raining. Thank you for the effort. This city is paralyzed under the rain and everything's more complicated. Thank you to Festival de las Ideas for organizing these events. Thank you to Laura for the organization and for inviting us, and hope you have a nice evening.
It was great, and thanks, Laura, for all the work. This was fantastic, and thanks, Lucia, for the wonderful questions. This was really great, and thanks for all the feedback. This was very useful to me. Thanks so much.